Turning now to a developing story, Health and Human Services Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. announced this week that he will soon direct the Centers for Disease Control to stop recommending fluoride be added to drinking water. This comes as lawmakers in Ohio, South Carolina, and Florida are proposing restrictions on fluoridated water. And just weeks ago, Utah became the first state to ban the addition of fluoride to the state's public water systems. Joining us now live is Razgaitis. He's a water and sustainability expert and the CEO of Flow Water. Hey, Rich, thanks so much for being here. Fluoride in drinking water has become a controversial topic. Let's start with this. Where do you fall on this question?
Well, my perspective is the data is really clear on fluoride being beneficial to children's teeth. I think the real argument is, do you want to systemically put this in everyone's drinking water, or do you want to allow it to be applied topically by dental offices? And so I think there's a really good reason to be able to remove fluoride from everyone's drinking water, particularly because it doesn't help beyond the age of adolescence. The problem then becomes, what do you do about marginalized populations that don't have access to dental care? So if we're talking about removing it in one area of our lives and giving people free choice, we also need to be having a conversation about what it means for children, how do they access it, and how do we make sure that marginalized communities have that same access and that same recovery that fluoride on topical treatment can provide.
How do you do that then? If not for fluoride in water, how would you propose doing that?
Well, it's a larger discussion around what do we do around healthcare and healthcare reform. I have a conviction that everybody has a fundamental human right to clean drinking water that you can trust. I think many people have that same conviction around healthcare and dental care. So the removal of fluoride in drinking water, I think ultimately really is, I love that it's getting attention from RFK and that fluoride is kind of a topic of the day. I think the real thing that's missing here is that there are 50,000 chemicals in use in the United States today. Fewer than 100 of those are regulated by the Safe Drinking Water Act of 1974. So what we really should be having a conversation around is, how do we eliminate this chemical cocktail that is affecting hundreds of millions of Americans and restore America's drinking water? And there's a variety of ways of doing that through policy reform, regulations, as well as in investing in a very broken and old aged infrastructure.
It's interesting. A ruling by a federal judge found, when it comes to fluoride anyway, there was enough of a risk from fluoridated water to have the EPA look into this to see maybe is there an effect on children's IQ. Is that a good idea for the EPA to look into this, do you think?
Well, I think it's always a good idea for people to do additional exploration and data. And so RFK has initiated a task force to be able to do more deep dive assessment on the systemic use of fluoride in drinking water, for example, and the IQ impact of that. There are a variety of studies out there that do suggest that high fluoridation levels in adolescents as well as adults have an inverse effect to IQ. So is it worth exploring and researching that? Absolutely. I think the real thing that's worth researching is, how do we restore drinking water and not only address the fluoridated aspect of it, but also address all these other contaminants that we're experiencing, things like PFAS and microplastics, pharmaceuticals and herbicides. But of course, I think additional research on that to validate that is important. And then if we're going to remove it from our drinking water, then I think there needs to be a really clear pathway and recommendation about what to do if you elect to do fluoridated treatment to your teeth or your kids' teeth. And then again, the impact on marginalized communities to ensure that they're not left behind.
You know, Secretary Kennedy and others have said that this idea of fluoridating water goes all the way back to the 1940s. It was a very different time back then. Now we've got all kinds of fluoride in toothpaste, mouthwash. Dental care has gotten a lot better. I wonder, do you think if fluoride was taken out of the water, would we start to really see some effects at the dentist's office?
Well, the data suggests right now that, and there's general consensus that fluoridated water reduces tooth decay by about 25%. And so that's a way of getting fluoridation through and into everybody. The problem ends up being, you know, as a dad of 2 daughters, as well as just a person that is a consumer and living in the United States, is a lot of people do not want that driven systemically in our water when there are so many other options, like fluoridated treatments that you can get in a dentist's office, fluoride in toothpaste. And so I do believe the data is really clear that fluoride does help and it protects the enamel of teeth, but the data is also equally clear that it's really only appropriate and useful in adolescence. So when you're 22, 25, 30, 35, there's really no impact and only potential downside to having fluoride in your water. So I think this is one of the reasons why RFK has initiated more studies, more committees around researching this, and I think it's worth doing, but I think it's also worth looking at real practical applications of how do we make sure that fluoride, if it is deemed useful and productive, how is that applied in the least risky way that gives people choice and also is available for everybody?
Rich, you know, whether it's fluoride or these other chemicals that you were talking about, it does seem like people get really fired up about their drinking water and what is in it. Is this just because we all get thirsty, we all need to drink water?
Yeah, gosh, that's a great question. Well, first of all, 60% of our bodies are made up of water. 70 to 75% of Americans, this includes kids as well, are chronically dehydrated. It's one of the reasons why I believe that we have an obesity epidemic is, you know, proper hydration yields satiety. It makes you feel better, look better, perform better, but it also makes you eat better. And so water is essential, and it is a hot topic. I actually don't think it gets as much attention as it deserves, because when you look at the data, 70 to 80% of Americans don't trust their tap water. Many people don't really know why, but when you look at the data and you see that there's over 50,000 chemicals in use in the United States, over 200 million Americans in the last few years have been drinking water contaminated with PFAS. 56% of Americans over the last 5 years have been drinking water with lead in it. This is a huge issue that has to get solved. And there's a variety of ways to solve it: regulation, policy reform, infrastructure investment. But the fourth thing is that we can all take measures into our own hands today by treating our water twice. And this fundamentally means using a filtration or a purification system wherever that water is coming out of, so that the filter or the membrane is doing it, not your body, not your kidneys, because they weren't designed to withstand tens of thousands of chemicals that have created this chemical cocktail in our drinking water in the United States today.
So really, whether you support fluoride in water or not, you got to give Secretary Kennedy this. We are at least talking about it and thinking about what is in our water.
Absolutely. I think that's probably one of the best things of this topic of fluoride in water is this raising a level of awareness. I think it's a pretty nonpartisan issue to say you want clean air, clean water, clean food. So for us to be having a conversation around this, I think is fantastic. And it's really the beginning of the conversation, because fluoride is an example of potentially the beginning of a variety of different problems, not the end all be all.
But by the way, what's in our bottled water, right? So we talk about drinking water and how heavily regulated that is and what's in that. People then reach for bottled water, but who's to say that's any better?
Well, so that's really interesting. The problem that we have in the United States today is not, could I just find a faucet somewhere? The problem that we have is people don't trust what's coming out of that faucet, and for good reason, some of the reasons that I mentioned before. So then what they do is they reach for bottled water. Bottled water is not the solution. In fact, the data shows that bottled water drinkers many times, and many studies have shown that it's anywhere from hundreds to hundreds of thousands of microplastic that are being ingested as a result of drinking bottled water. And the reality is today, the average American in the United States has 1 plastic spoon's worth of plastic just sitting in their brain in microplastics. So what we need to be able to do, and the way you get that plastic into you, is through what you eat and what you drink. So what we need to be able to do is eliminate those sources of microplastic contamination. Drinking water that's been sitting baked in plastic is a terrible idea, but that also leads back to we've got to restore America's water infrastructure, and we need to filter and treat our water at the point of dispense, because plastics are not only terrible for the environment, but they're also terrible for your human health.
Well, a lot to think about, and now I'm thirsty. Rich Razgaitis, water and sustainability expert and the CEO of Flow Water. Rich, thank you so much for your expertise.
Patrick, thanks for having me on.